I have my spoon clean for tasting. Better, but it needs more. So that meant that we needed a teaspoon, and I'm going to add another half a teaspoon. And I'm going to add a little sugar. Now, I will tell you something about cooking gefilte fish. The people of Poland and Galicia and Romania like their fish sweeter. The people in this area, the Ashkenazis, prefer it, which are the far Eastern Europe, not quite so sweet. I happen to myself think it gives a sweeter flavor, and so I like to add a little sugar. So we're going to grab some sugar, and we'll put a good heaping teaspoon of it. Now, in cooking Minnesota fish, which we're using today, was pike, northern, and whitefish. The pike and northern being dry fish, the whitefish being oily. We have a mixture of fishes, and when you do make gefilte fish, you have to have a mixture of the dry fish and the oily fish. Occasionally, when you're mixing the fish and you feel it isn't quite oily enough, you can add a little vegetable cooking oil. Every part of the country uses the part of the fish that are in their area, and today we're going to use, as I said, the pike, the walleye, and the whitefish. And we start with, the fish is always filleted, as we talked about before, and then you saw the bones go into our fish pot. And here's one of the fillets, and then we cut it up in squares about like this, and we grind it. Now, in the old days, they would take the fish and chop it, and chop, and chop, till it got fine. And then some 60, 70 years ago, the grinder came out, and we used the grinder. So I still stay in the old-fashioned way, and I grind, and I grind, and I like what comes out. And it's very easy. It takes a little arm or elbow grease, and you've got it. I'm going to finish the onions, and I am going to grind them now, and I have a little trick to tell you when I'm grinding the onions. The onions cause a lot of juice. And when we get through grinding them, we have to clean the grinder. And I've got a little technique that I have of my own. In making gefilte fish, you need fillers. The Eastern European people used carrots, maybe because they wanted to stretch the fish. And then to bind it, you need either breadcrumbs or matzo meal. Matzo meal is ground up matzahs, very, very fine. And it's good to use with hamburgers and meatloaves and anything you make. And during Passover, that's the only thing we can use. I like to use a little mixture of the bread and the matzo meal because the bread cleans out the grinder and you get all the leftover fish and food you have. Now we'll put in the piece of bread. This is a very old-fashioned method, but a good trick that I still use in 1996. There we go. Can you see it coming out? You see that means that it's all nice and clean. Well, we have finished grinding all the fish and the onions and the bread, and now we're going to start putting everything together. And it's chop, 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 and we keep turning the bowl around and we chop. We're chopping and it's looking good. It's looking like we're ready to make our balls. So now we have to take the biggest test of all, and that's when we feel it to see. Oh, it feels so good. It's perfect. We're going to make the best balls. But you always have to wet your hands first. That's the clue. To see how it rolls better, we start making the balls. And as I make them, I'm going to drop them into the stock. See, it's an oval ball. A nice oval ball. It's not a round ball. And we'll turn the heat up a little bit so it doesn't stop rolling. And we start making them. My mother was a working woman. She helped my father in his business. He had two businesses by that time. And she had a housekeeper that was Finnish. My father spoke fluent Finnish. So it worked out very well because they talked Finnish together, and my mother sort of filled in But the problem arose in the family. I was almost 3 and I couldn't speak English. I only spoke Finnish because that's what she spoke to me. And it was rather sad. And so my father went to her and told her, he says, if you don't start speaking English to the child, I won't be able to send her to public school. And pretty soon we would like to have her start in school. And it was rather sad because she didn't want to. She wanted me to speak Finnish the way she did. Anyhow, I have to go. When I was a little older, I mentioned before, I had these 2 Finnish girlfriends that lived across the street, Iva and Ona. And I used to go to their house a lot. One day I went in, and the mother's cooking in the kitchen, and she's making what I thought was gefilte fish balls. It smelled the same, it looked the same. So I asked her about it, and she told me what it was, and I said, you know, my mother makes something just like that, and we call it gefilte fish. And she looked at me, I said, it smells just like it, I'll have to taste it. She says, you know, you're one of us. And that was sort of a beautiful feeling. Why did I decide to keep kosher? That's interesting. My future husband-to-be, Arnold Grace, came to Hibbing to spend a week after we became engaged and to meet my family. And he came down to visit the drugstore. Naturally, he was a pharmacist in the drug business too. And my father had, besides a drugstore, he had a retail pharmacy and a wholesale chemical supply business. And he carried beautiful knives, case, double steel, and he carried Fiesta ware and pots and pans, like a good old-fashioned hardware store does. So he came over, and my dad came over and whispered to me, he says, you know, I've been thinking, you know, Arnold comes from a rather religious family, and maybe he would like you to keep kosher. Have you ever thought about it? And I said, no, but I said, I don't have to even hesitate. If he thinks he would like it, I'd be glad to. I'm starting out, that's the way to do it. I said, I'm willing to go that way. So I went over and I told him, I said, you know, my dad's been talking to me, and he made a suggestion. And I told him, he looked at me, and he was really, he didn't know what to say. He's, you know, that would be the nicest thing you could do for me and my mother and my family, but I never would have thought of asking you to do it. He said, if you want to, I'd be thrilled. And I says, fine, doesn't make any difference to me. And that's how I started to keep kosher. And now he's gone a few years, and I still keep kosher in his memory. Here I am with the final dish, your gefilte fish with the golden coins on top. My grandmother always served it just like this, and occasionally would put a few radishes because they were always available for color. Traditionally, the gefilte fish balls are served with white horseradish and with red horseradish. The red is made with beets and a little sugar to give it that color. It's a little softer in tone. This is stronger, but some people prefer to eat their gefilte fish that way. And for a nice new touch, a Nouvelle touch, from my garden, from my herb garden, fresh chives with the chive flowers, which are edible. And we're into edible flowers these days, so we have to touch it up with a final touch. And some edible violets that match. I've enjoyed doing this. It's been exciting, and I hope that you find it enjoyable. Thank you.